On to our main topic of the day. When I started writing this talk, I was like, wow, it's going to be fun to give an IndyPy talk. A lot of you have seen me around. I'm really tall. It's hard to miss. If I show up at a meetup, I stick out like a sore thumb. Um, but I've been hovering around in the community, having conversations with a few people, and it really made me appreciate the IndyPy community for a couple of its aspects, right? It's very welcoming, very inviting, very open, and has a huge dynamic range of experience. Maybe you haven't even written a line of code, but you heard about Python and you're here. Uh, or the opposite, maybe you're a developer at one of these large companies and you may be the only Python developer there and you're looking for a community. Um, so I personally teach programming. Typically, I do also dabble in cybersecurity concepts, but primarily in programming. I came to Python after doing some Java and C# for a while, and haven't looked back. Live it, love it, you know. This talk will start by talking more conceptually, and I have a very short presentation. I was given a 45-minute window. I want most of it to be conversation, but I have about 10, 12 slides, and all I'm here to discuss is like, what is the process of not only getting into it, but making it a passion, a hobby, something central in your life. And so there are patterns and anti-patterns that I've seen from people who try from an educational context to get into Python. And we can talk about the technology itself. We can talk about, balancing it with the lives and like finding space for it. These are all very interesting things to consider. But anyway, I wanted to start with a piece of artwork because it's always nice to just have something pretty to look at while I'm jabbering away. Yes, this is a really interesting piece of abstract art. Kind of goes with the theme of the day. Abstractions are can be intimidating, but they can also be beautiful. So this abstract art, you don't need words to describe it, and a lot of things in technology are the same way. If you try to understand it, there's beauty there, but it's not always evident at first. With that, we'll depart on lessons learned teaching Python. Um, I would be lying if I said that I didn't have a set of influences that are directly creating the core tenets of this talk. You'll probably notice the books there on the bottom. The 21st anniversary edition of Pragmatic Programmer just came out, so there's no more references to Smalltalk and other things that you may not know. But Ruby's in there. Rust is in there for the people who want a more updated version. Pragmatic Programmer goes a lot into the nitty gritty about like, so you want to be a programmer, what are the tools that you're going to be using? He talks about practice, a little bit about psychology, and at the end of the day, about coding. So that's kind of good. Most people graduate from Pragmatic Programmer into something like Clean Code, where now you've started to make projects and you're starting to realize not all decisions are created equal. And so how do you save time by like making smarter choices about your code quality? And there's a bunch of principles and lessons that can be learned there by Bob Martin, Uncle Bob Martin, for people who have seen his talks. The three top books kind of lean into learning. We have Mastery from Robert Greene that kind of goes over what does it mean to master something. And he takes historical examples and modern examples. Paul Graham from Y Combinator is in here. So it's an interesting book and can, if you want to mull over, picking up a hobby and taking it seriously, or, making something a large part of your identity. Mastery will talk about kind of what that process might look like. And the other two are just modern books that discuss the process of skill acquisition and some of the prerequisites. With that's all the influences that you're going to subtly see. I put this in the forefront of the article because some of those concepts, if you've seen this, you'll immediately realize it's from that. Or if you're just getting started, maybe these books might be something that interests you. Okay, so let's get going. we want to master something, and we may not know a lot about it. So the very first sign that somebody's well on their way to kind of learning and being engaged is following their curiosity. Like, to explore has no destination necessarily, but usually you just dig deeper and deeper into to a point where eventually you find something that really has captured your attention. Um, so this is the first step. I lay this out because there's about eight steps that are roughly indicative of a transfer from interest into a true passion for something. So from exploration, you typically have issues of saying, okay, so I'm interested in this new thing, and I want to know more about it. um, People typically will look towards like resources, like how to do something, like how do I do XYZ. I always recommend finding a role model, maybe somebody who is influential that kind of like opened your eyes to a whole different career. Um, John Carmack was that for me. He created Doom, one of the he basically revolutionized first person shooter genre as far as video games go, but he's done other things which we'll find out about later when I talk about some of his achievements. One of the most notable recent ones, he's created VR Oculus Rift, and well, he was on the team, the engineering team that helped realize it. The hardware was actually already around and created by somebody else. But um, so now that you've explored and you found something that's interested you, in the context of Python, this might be, deep learning. So maybe you're looking MIT's Lex Friedman, who has an amazing podcast that you might want to check out, or Three Blue One Brown, or web development. And so you're looking at people like on YouTube, like Tversky Media, who tackles frameworks and things related to front end development or back end development in Python. There's many resources out there, and having a role model will help introduce you to new material to just fuel that fire. Um, so I think starting in my next cohort, when I teach, I will mandate that by day 2 you need to come with a role model, and I think it'll really help guide people's ambition and keep them focused on the prize. Because a lot of people are quick to jump into technology for the sake of technology, but then once they've learned a tool or learned an API, not too long after that, they're like, okay, so what do I do? I'm like, well, how did you get there? Like, what was the ambition? Like find the root, right? Um,
I love that idea a lot. Actually, I'm going to steal it from you for
yeah,
future
yeah,
events.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Find a role model. It's something that's really helped me. And your role models change, you know, as do your interests, right? But once you've found a role model, there's plenty of data out there. For you mathematically focused people, there's actually like concrete data you can download and look at. And here are two pieces of data that might help somebody if they were interested in Python or like DevOps, because you heard that DevOps is a thing, right? I don't know, but to make a map. So any good conceptual framework is going to have some meta map of the things that you need to know or the things that you'll interact with, whether it's tools such as your code editors and your terminals and your operating systems, or it's libraries and frameworks that you're going to use to do that thing that you really wanted to do. Um, Also, sometimes there are prerequisites. And so roadmaps like the one on the left, which roadmap.sh covers web dev, front and back end, and DevOps in 3 collaborative hosted on GitHub repositories where discussions about related technologies and the steps to reach proficiency in the categories are community sourced. So very cool stuff to look at there. I put the link there for that reason. But also, we live in a community that completes surveys yearly. JetBrains had one specifically for Python you might want to look into. I know they're a sponsor here. And it'll just give you a little bit more perspective. So, even if you can't find somebody that'll mentor you and guide you, or maybe you're trying to get the first steps off the ground on your own, you can still make informed decisions. And you do this by making a map. So all right. So once you've started exploring, you found something interesting. Well, who does that too? So who's my role model? And then you said, okay, so how do I understand this domain? And you've made a map. Well, now it's time to get to work, right? So before that, this is something you may have seen before. My background is in sociology, psychology, and theology. And so I'm really big about this stuff. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically, these are building blocks. And in order to reach self-actualization, which is this idea that you have crafted an identity and you feel like you're fully realized, you need to have prerequisites. And you can look on this list. It starts in things such as, food and shelter, obviously, but then employment, health, and then eventually, you go up, and by the end, people that manage to reach the top of this pyramid, in Maslow's view, have reached the pinnacle of what it means to be a person. So I make the argument that mastery can be one outlet that helps you reach self-actualization after you have a community, you have employment, you have status. Next thing you want to do is really master something, something to be proud of, something to share, right? Yeah, the game of life is playing in the background. I saw that. Yeah, rest in peace. So
It's
anyway,
true. It's true. He just passed relatively recently, right?
yeah, it was I think this month. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has a couple great interviews. What's his first name? Is it John?
Tim.
Tim Conway. Yep. So Tim Conway found how there's emergent of complex patterns out of simple rules. It's a very inspirational, but totally look into that too. Good side note. So yeah, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, something to definitely consider, because I find, especially with new people learning inside the context of education, um, when they're getting really frustrated, it can be in one of two camps. Either new people are frustrated because the concept hasn't clicked yet, or because they can't seem to devote enough time and energy to building a skill. And if they can't build the time and energy, then I look towards this pyramid to say, well, how are you feeling? What's your self-esteem like? Um, you know, how's your, how are all these lower levels impacting your ability to focus currently? So just something to look into. There's a bunch of reading on this, but I'm not going to bore you. Hopefully you kind of get the gist. There are prerequisites to being able to really dive into any topic, and this is a good way to visualize it. Okay, so how to define the quality of the learning that's going on. This has been kind of a head scratcher for me. There's a lot of literature on it, but in practice, um, there's something called transfer learning. So transfer learning is this idea that if I teach you how to throw a basketball, you might know how to throw a baseball, because they are similar enough that you can transfer the skills from one thing into something new. Okay. And inside like formal education, transfer learning has been the crux of like why we can teach people a 4-year education, and then day one on the job, they're just incapable of doing the things that actually drive business value per se. Um, and so as far as like directness goes, it's like trying to avoid unnecessary transfer. So if you want to build websites, you probably shouldn't start by building a DevOps pipeline, right? Like you should probably start by learning the fundamentals of HTML and CSS. Yes, down the road, you're going to want CI/CD and all these nice things, testing, and all these things that kind of work together to make a modern experience. But try to direct your learning directly to the thing that drove you to this to begin with, because the system feeds back on itself, right? So when you explored, it was led by curiosity. Curiosity is one of the very few like self-perpetuating energy machines in the world. The more you feed your curiosity, the more curious you get about new things, and so on and so forth. And so if you can directly map back to that thing that you were exploring and interested in, and you can do that, not only are you going to avoid the trap of like learning things that may be tangential, but even better than that, you're going to feed that curiosity engine. Um, yep. Sorry, I just keep looking, Calvin. That's all right. It's fine, man.
don't pay attention to me.
No,
I
you're
will
fine.
grab questions for you and throw them up there.
Cool. So, all right. So after we talk about trying to map one-to-one with what you actually want to accomplish, and so going back to painting, right? Like, if you want to paint, you probably should paint. You probably shouldn't go take a sketch class before, unless for some reason that's recommended. Um, After that, once you start doing things directly, you're going to see your strengths and weaknesses. It's going to be obvious. Are you spending a lot of time debugging syntax errors or whatever? Are you getting these messages that are very cryptic and you're having trouble debugging? Maybe you should practice debugging. And there are ways to obviously do that. So drilling, like in Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi had the wisdom to have his pupil wax on, wax off, and he was frustrated. Why am I doing all of this? It doesn't map one to one. But he wasn't concerned about directness because he already knew that the drilling needed to happen, that you needed to get those reps in, like anything, like when you work out, in order to reach this point where you have the base skills necessary so that you're not caught in the weeds, right? So like when you're if you're trying to build out a project and you're fighting Git all the time, and you haven't got those reps on the just how to submit commit messages, if you haven't done these couple of reps on these sort of things, you're going to have issues version controlling, which is going to take away from you actually building the application that you want. The last thing that I always look for in good learning is feedback, and coding is brutal. Like frankly, like right. If fundamentally, if your program doesn't compile, if you have syntax errors, if you have race conditions and things like this, it will give you feedback. So fortunately, like in the context of coding, learning quality in the feedback category taken care of. So that's kind of the three basic qualities. So we've explored, we found a role model, we've mapped out our like what we want to do, and now we're focused on the learning quality that we're doing. So what is kind of next? Well, this has a lot of I guess I would say it this way. I'd say this is the only slide that I have without a picture because I really want to hit home one thing, and that's there's an African proverb that sums it up well, that if you want to go fast, you can go alone, but if you want to go far, you should go together. Um, Learning programming or any complex engineering or math by yourself is very, very discouraging. We, especially in IndyPy, have a great community, and I highly recommend making sure that you engage in the community, because you never know when you'll have the mentorship. You never know if the thing that you were doing might be made easier by the insight and of the people who have gone before you. We sit on the shoulders of giants. People here have built production level apps, some probably spanning over 1 million lines of code easily. And so they'd be more than willing or able to help you if you can convince them, right? So make sure that you engage with the community. It'll also keep you empowered, and it's also something that'll help you celebrate when you do build out interesting things. All right, so we are now on the last two slides, and this is where it gets interesting. So now that you've done the learning, you've mapped out what you need to do, a lot of people stall here. And so there's one thing that if you can remember from this talk, consumption is not the same as production. So you can sit and you can watch tutorials and it feels good. Feels like you're acquiring things. This is that like it's kind of like Netflix. Like it feels good. Like the autoplay on YouTube, man, if I'm watching tech, like man, I'm just making myself better and better and better. But until you build something, you're missing one part of the feedback for one. And two, it's summed up well in the saying, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. There's a pretty big chasm between the conceptual and the actual. And so when you get the feedback and when you build the project, it doesn't have to be huge. There's a bunch of things like MicroPython if you want to do embedded systems or IoT. There's, very simple Hello World web apps that you can build and deploy to GitHub pages if they're static. There's, a bunch of things that you can do that are weekend projects that are going to feed that curiosity, right? Because, oh, I could do that. And nobody can tell you no. Yeah, here it is. This is my project. I did. What do you mean I didn't do it? Right? It's that confidence and that esteem that's really going to keep the momentum of your curiosity. And so after you've reached this point, and you start building projects and you learn new things, right? No two projects are perfectly identical. Maybe you'll learn SMS messaging through AWS. Maybe you'll learn JavaScript because you need a front end and you don't want to use some bindings from Python, which aren't perfect yet, as we must admit it. They're getting better though. Another interesting side note, there's a talk called The Black Swan that was given at PyCon. Very interesting to look into for people in Python that want to see the areas where Python still needs to expand or are struggling. But anyway, so you're building these projects. You're getting this self-esteem. Man, I'm doing this, this, and this. And you're challenging yourself more and more. You see how this is like climbing up the mountain. But what are you fed by? You're not fed by, oh, I must sit down and code. Oh, sit down for 4 hours and code today. No, you have a project led by curiosity. So build something. Once you've done this enough, you start really being able to build astounding things. So the 3 things that I show here are some of the life work of John Carmack, the person that I said was my role model. He worked on the low-level implementation involved with Doom and Doom's engine. He's helped with hardware and software integrations with Oculus as a chief technology officer, I believe, and which was bought by Facebook. And before Oculus, he had a space company where he built it was Armadillo Aerospace, and he was in the space race, right? He wanted to offer as a passenger the ability to sign up and travel on this. But if you listen to some of his talks, if you're in the mood for finding a role model and you don't know who to pick, maybe you want to pick John Carmack. He has a bunch of great interviews, and they're all very enlightening. So I do recommend that. But the point here is that you've made great projects and they're building on top of each other. Your work's going to get increasingly impressive, and you should be proud. And if you were to look at this and ask Carmack, is he doing what he loves? There's no doubt in my mind that he would say yes. So with that, that's the end of the slides. I just want to have a very quick conversation about the ideas. And from this point, I would love to take questions regarding Python-specific hurdles that you may be dealing with, or questions that you might have. I know the entry to many different areas of Python. I'm no expert in any one domain because I haven't specialized. But I can definitely talk to you about the first steps and some of the things that a lot of people get stuck on, whether it's package management and environment, to whether it's libraries and frameworks. Yeah, Calvin's laughing because he knows it's true though, right, Calvin?
Oh, I absolutely know it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been doing Python since the year 2000, and that problem has not gotten easier.
Well, a lot of people are very surprised when we say that the language is old. They're like, "What do you mean? I just heard about this after data science and the huge 30% update." But yeah, so does anyone have any questions? There's a lot of newbies in Python, and I've had to launch people with literally no experience.
Please don't be bashful. Actually, I think Maverick, you literally raised your hand physically in real life.
Yes.
Cool.
Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is Maverick. I'm brand new to IndyPy and brand new to Python as of just like 1 week ago. I just started learning it.
Nice. Welcome.
I guess what would be like some, aside from like learn like the raw basics and just like the fundamentals, what would you give like advice-wise to like a beginner?
Yeah, so the fundamentals, so that's you doing work. My question to you is like, what is the ambition driving that work? Like figure out a waypoint, something, your North Star, something to shoot for.
Mhm.
And then there's nothing really that can be done on a computer that can't be done in Python, with very, very few exceptions. It may not be the best choice, but for a person learning programming fundamentals, you can both learn that in tandem with tackling that job, right? So, my question to you: Do you have a goal in mind? So you've wanted to learn Python. Is this for data science reasons? Is this for web? Is this because you wanted to learn what programming was all about?
Probably. So I'm actually a part of Kinsey Academy,
Oh, awesome.
Just like Calvin was mentioning, I think earlier. And this is, I guess, the beginning of the back end portion of our curriculum.
Yeah. Okay, and the
So,
back end comes after your JavaScript introduction, right?
yep.
Okay, so
React was like the last thing.
very cool. So you've learned how to build projects. Now my question to you is like, what does deployment look like? Are you using automated platforms? Are you using like Heroku, and you're just, whenever I need to, I sync it up with master and just call it a day.
It's so far it's just been Heroku.
Yeah. So my question is like, have you even heard of like CI/CD? Have
No,
you?
completely over. Nope.
Okay. So some waypoints for you is like, wouldn't deployment be nice if it was just at a push of a button? Have you done a little bit of testing? Making sure your code does what it's supposed to do.
I don't think we've done too much as far as like testing goes.
Okay.
But
So,
I'm like taking notes as you like talk too.
yeah, so CI/CD might be a little bit a waste though, but let's consider this. You write code. You want that code to do what it's supposed to, and you know what it's supposed to do, so you're going to probably test it. So the very first thing that I would have you look into is PyTest. Go write like a calculator or a simple app, and then prove to me in PyTest that it works. And actually, Talk Python to me is a great podcast, and they're very big advocates of coding. One of the people there is it Brian Alkin? He has a PyTest introduction that is well worth the money. He has a book on it. It's about 2 years old, but would be a great add to your library. So, very good question.
Huge thank you.
Yeah, and I saw today on Twitter, there's a couple people put up, or one person at least put up a poll, kind of gauging what people were using for testing in Python, and PyTest was like #1 by far.
Yeah. Isn't Anthony, who's the author of that? I forget his last name. He also, he codes on Twitch. Currently unemployed. If you're looking for an open source developer to support, the author of PyTest is currently working on his own. Throw him a couple bucks. I think he uses what is it? Is it Tidal, or what is it called? The platform that subsidizes open source packages you care about. Not through GitHub. There's another one. I forget it off the top of my head.
There's a sorted history there as well. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. I don't know. I'm fortunately like in academia enough that I don't get into like the tussles and brawls between these like behind the scenes package maintainers and things. Okay. So any other questions?
Yeah, please bring some more questions. We got people. Actually, we have people from all over the world at this point.
I noticed somebody said Colombia.
Yeah, Colombia.
From Colombia.
Matt Hamilton is actually here from Bristol, UK.
Oh, cool.
So we've got folks from all over.
Just to clarify, double check at least.
Mm-hmm.
PyTest, is that something that you can download on Visual Studio Code or?
So pip, I'm sure there's probably some interesting plugins, but so make sure that you're using a virtual environment, right? So if you haven't learned too much about pip, learn about virtual environments, and then feel free to download PyTest as one of your first demo packages. It's super easy to use. I mean, go ahead, Cameron.
I'm pretty confident there's a plugin for PyTest in Visual Studio Code. Like you should be able to just in Visual Studio Code run the tests, whether it's PyTest or not. There should be some testing plugin in there. So
it's all coming, Maverick. Don't worry, it's coming.
There's a lot right here.
yeah, and it's
we do start with unit test first, and then we can go to PyTest.
Okay. Yeah, unit test.mock is useful, especially like you'll use that even after you move primarily over to PyTest probably.
Yeah, no, testing is a lot easier. In frameworks like PyTest make it super easy to do some pretty cool stuff, but also start out very easily. Yeah. You'll find that, especially since this is your second language, Python's not going to be too hard for you to pick up. One great thing is
C++ has, I think, 136 keywords available to you just in your environment before any imports. Python, I think last time I checked, is at like 67. So like it is intentionally a very small and concise and pragmatic language. So you're going to find yourself having just the right number of tools. You're not going to have so many tools that you don't know whether to use a hammer or a screwdriver. So.
I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah. So who else has some questions for Justin?
I was just going to pop in there to say that I may not agree with Justin's statement to learn CI/CD stuff when you're just learning stuff, but did he actually say what CI/CD means to someone that's learning Python?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. So to clarify, so when you want to have your website redeploy, you can either do this manually.
What's deployment?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, please be devil's advocate all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. Deployment is when you take code that you've written locally on your machine. So just a project you're working on, and you put it onto another machine, and you make it available usually to the world. Whether it's like a website, so that you would use Heroku for, or whether it's and you can deploy on the same machine. It's not typically done, but usually you'll give something to a cloud provider, and then ideally you stand up that code so that code is running on that machine and does what it is that you made it do. Whether it's hand over an HTML and CSS file, or whether it's just send raw information like data. Like, go ahead.
So like basically from my local machine to a server.
Yeah, so that's deployment.
Gotcha.
So continuous integration and continuous deployment. So integration, consider it like here's two blobs, old code and new code. Integration and then deployment, right? So
Gotcha.
You want to have a process of doing this, because when you update your website, you don't want to spend a whole 4 hours or something doing it manually on an EC2 instance, or you don't want to have to go to the Heroku CLI every time you want to do this. You just want it to happen automatically. And some of those tools are really smart, but knowing how to do it on your own is very beneficial too, because a lot of the power that first came to me in Python was in the ability to automate everything that I would have done with things like a bash script, or things that I would have done like simple tasks like reminders, or you can make apps that solve small problems, but it scales all the way into applications that could do anything. Right? If there's an app, like right now I'm building a financial app that is going to take historical data and back test it, right? As part of a platform. So Python gets a reputation for not scaling, and I don't believe that.
Yeah, I don't believe it either. But it's nice for scratching those itches. Like one of my favorite lightning talks was actually my brother gave a lightning talk about how he used Python to have his computer announce to him when push keys were going to be available prior to Easter.
Nice. So I think, is Xavier, are you still in here? Xavier's not still in here. So my TA was in here, but one of the projects that I wanted him to do is he took one of the Amazon Go buttons. There was a library he could use. So just someone else's code he could use to basically hijack it. So it wasn't used for Amazon. It was used for whatever he wanted. And he tied it to a Domino's ordering platform. So when he pressed the button, it ordered his favorite pizza and delivered it to his house. So like,
That's awesome.
You could just game and you could just press the button. Yeah, he didn't have an idea. I'm like, I've always wanted this, so you build one, and he did.
That's
and
cool.
So, yeah,
that's really cool. That's really cool.
With IoT devices being so accessible, there's nothing in your house that is safe anymore. From brewing coffee when you the gyroscope on your phone moves in the morning, so when you turn off your alarm, could totally do stuff like that, right? Very cool stuff, and all capable in Python for sure. So
there's a question in the chat from Steve. If one wants to develop a web application for data science models, what are the common paths? Django, Flask?
Yes. Okay, so it depends on your level of experience. I typically will recommend, if you plan on having this, I assume you want a website that's going to display your data, right? the easiest to probably get started is Django. It has a bit of a learning curve, but once you've learned it, they have a very good, like almost like Ruby on Rails model. If you don't know what that means, it's like there's a very specific like folder structure that every app has. Files are in predictable places, and it helps solve some of those questions that a new person might not know, which is like, where should I put this code? You know, does it belong in one file? Does it belong in two files? Where do I put my models, my views, my controllers, or in that case, model view template, right?
Yeah, I would concur that the nice part about Django is that it is very opinionated.
Yes.
Flask gives you a lot of rope to hang yourself, except that it's very easy to get started with. So I think that folks should lean toward Django if they can, just to get started, because they don't know a lot about what's
little
going
bit
on.
of time commitment up front, but your app will probably be successful.
And a lot of win.
Yeah. Go
ahead.
But
if you just want to display data from a data science-y thing, I'd probably just use Jupyter Notebooks.
Oh yeah, completely take the argument. Yeah, just host it on GitHub, and there's built-in Jupyter Notebook integration. That's even better. That's way better.
Yeah, I mean, if you just want to make some pretty visuals like right away and get just a lot of win, Jupyter Notebooks is definitely the way to go.
Plotly is a lot friendlier than Matplotlib. I was using that for candlesticks. The graph objects, the Go, are very nice on that. Very cool. So yeah, that's one of those things about directness. So going back to the principles of the talk, define what it is that excites you. Are you trying to build a beautiful web page to host this on, or are you trying to display your findings? Jupyter Notebook, if you're displaying your findings. If this is your research and your life work and you want to host it somewhere nice and you want to call it your home, maybe a website. But that comes with a bunch of hidden prerequisites also.
There's a couple more questions here or comments. Let's see. So people need getting kids to bed. Lights being driven by Python, which is awesome, James, by the way. If you've already got data science models, I mean, James, feel free to speak up here. You're definitely willing or allowed.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I don't know too much about Anvil. I don't have a lot of exposure. I've heard talks on it. I haven't touched the platform myself.
So there will be a talk by the creator of Anvil at Python WebConf.
Yeah, I see that now. Awesome.
It's also awesome. Yeah, Matt. Well,
I'm using Anvil for a couple of my clients. So
cool.
It's awesome.
It's very cool for draggy droppy. Double click on a button to get event handlers, and standing up UIs very, very quickly. So if you've already got some Python experience, data science models, and you just need to shove your results somewhere, particularly if you want to publish it, or a quick UI for interaction of, change the dates around, change some parameters around, and have the results vary based on user input. Anvil may be a good option for that type of quick results oriented programming.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, that's the thing is, Python's a really good example of a language where you're sitting on the shoulders of giants. A lot of people have done the hard work that you don't have to do because the community is so open and these libraries are accessible. So definitely, they say like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In the world of development, half an hour of Googling and seeing what's on offer and sizing up these libraries by their GitHub stars and their publishers and things like this can really save you. Like, oh, how do I draw to a canvas? And well, if I want a graph, I have to do it all manually, right? Like, you don't want to do that. So very cool.
Awesome.
I think that's all the questions.
Yeah, that's all the questions. Actually, it's probably, if you have any last comments, anybody's got one last question, we can fit that in. Otherwise, I will move over to our door prize. And after our door prize, please stick around. We're going to do some kind of rapid fire IndyPy speed dating networking type thing. I want to basically split folks up into a couple breakout rooms. There's a couple stock questions. I'll give everyone 15 minutes to basically get to know each other. That way it's still got some interactive pieces to this. But if anyone's got any last questions for Justin, please feel free to ask them now.
This is more so just like a question for the group.
Yeah.
IndyPy meets once a month on the exact same time? Every month? Twice a month, okay.
So we have our mixer on the second Tuesday of the month, which I'm proud to say IndyPy has owned the second Tuesday of the month for 13 years. That is our day. If there's any other meetup on it, they're gonna come fight me. The fourth Tuesday of the month, we do a lunchtime meeting, which is mostly just gather together, chit chat, exchange ideas, questions, eat lunch together. There's no formal agenda for that one, other than folks getting together and exchanging ideas.
Okay.
And we're doing this virtual as well. So if folks from around the globe want to join us, please feel free to. It is dozen to 2 dozen of us getting together, having lunch together. There's a little clatter of silverware and dishes, but other than that, it's a lot of fun. Cool. Any last questions for Justin before I move into the door prizes?
I've got one.
Yes, please, Michelle.
Yeah. So GitHub, I can use it, and I've watched all different kinds of tutorials and read the documentation, and I struggle with it because there's a lot of just enter this command, enter that command, but I don't really understand what it's actually doing. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like I don't know where my repository, what my repository is doing and how it's all working, and then I don't like using it. So
what I might say on that is GitHub is like a social platform for your code, but the tool that underlies it, that gets your code up there, typically is Git. And so this was created by Linus, the creator of Linux. It's a great tool. The commands that you're running are Git commands, and so it's Git that you'll have to work through if you want to upload code that way. Might I ask how much coding have you done up to this point? Like if you had to put it like in the number of projects, would you say like less than 5?
No, I think if I can.
Oh, go ahead, Calvin.
Speak here. It's that I think the issue is deeper than that. There are repositories on GitHub that have, because of the state of GitHub is a long-standing repository, many repositories for these kinds of projects. Sure. But there are lots of repositories out there that have bit rotted, and there are lots of invalid instructions and lots of things where you go try them, they don't work. I think even before you get to the point of forking something and committing your own code and making a pull request, there's a lot of extra steps that may not work for newbies. And how do they overcome that? I mean, Michelle, correct me if I am wrong, but I think that's more the heart of your issue.
Yeah, I followed the documentation, and you don't really have to use Git. I have Git on one of my computers, but I use Jupyter notebooks most of the time. So I usually just go directly to the command line. I don't open up Git. And so
you're saying you don't open up GitHub?
Yeah, well, I do sometimes. I end up doing that.
This is GitHub naming themselves what they did is the best and worst marketing idea ever.
I would agree.
I would agree as well.
If you're doing data science, you can also drag and drop. So like when you make a new repository, the bare minimum to get into it is a modern browser and a modern OS, and you can literally just take those files and drop them.
I did that. It doesn't turn out the same way though. So
okay.
I've done it both ways. Then I always have to look back up how I got it there. I just want to know how it works. I have a degree in computer science, but the one thing, and it didn't do me any favors, it felt good at the time, but they dropped the operating systems class from the curriculum. And I'm finding that that's where I'm really struggling. So anytime I'm, installing something, you're trying to understand what's going on. Yeah, Cameron.
If you wanted to pop into the IndyPy Slack sometime,
for sure.
Someone there will be more than happy to go over
an
the
extended
stuff.
demo.
But just but just to make everything 100% clear, Git is terrible to use. Everyone will agree with that. It is it is a wonderful tool that it exists, but the learning curve. The UI for it is absolutely atrocious. And I mean, I spent a very long time teaching people Git, so I know it very well, and it's just terrible.
No, I think that's an accurate statement, and I'm going to go back to what I said is there's a lot of people pointing to, from a Stack Hub Stack Overflow article to GitHub pointing to ancient projects. You don't know what's up to date, and their documentation is terrible. And you know what? It happened to work on their machine, but not yours.
Right.
Is a lot of the case I find.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry. Speaking of GitHub,
yeah.
if you're taking chunks of code from different projects and you're creating your own project on GitHub, what's the what is the common way that people attribute their section of code, or are they just sort of swapping out code and making big projects and calling it their own?
Steve, that is a whole talk on its own.
Yeah,
but I think that people get to choose how that works by the licenses they choose for their own projects. And if they don't put a license in their repository, that's their own fault. I guess at that point, I don't know what it defaults to. Is it public domain?
No, it's the opposite. It's 100% copyrighted.
It's copyright. So be careful.
Yeah.
So only do that for projects that have a license.txt or license.md or have license headers on the project's files themselves. And they will tell you exactly what you're expected to do, whether you need to attribute them, whether it's like a BSD where it's 3 clause or it's GPL and you got to do X, Y, and Z. It should be explicitly stated. And if it's not, I think Cameron's right. It is definitely a copyright situation where they have sole copyright.
But if you want to learn about this stuff at PyCon, it was PyCon Portland, I think the second year at Portland. I can't remember what year that was. There was a very good talk about open source licenses. It was actually probably one of the best.
Yeah, I think I was there too.
Licensing talks I've ever seen. And it was at PyCon. I'm sure you'll be able to find it at pyvideo.org.
Thank you.